Welcome everybody. Good morning. I'm Fiona Goodwin from the EAUC. We are the Secretariat of the Climate Commission. This is a Climate Commission event for chairs and governors in association with the Association of Colleges and the Committee of University Chairs. We will be muting you all whilst we have the presentations from our expert witnesses, and then we will be going into breakout rooms for the session, and then there'll be a full Q&A at the end. We are recording the session, which will be available for viewing after the event. If during the Q&A, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either use the chat function or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. We will put any direction about the breakout rooms in the chat for you, and I will hand you over to Jim Longhurst, who is chairing the session. Jim is the Climate Commissioner, a chair of the EAUC board, and the Assistant Vice Chancellor of University of the West of England.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very important meeting for the Climate Commission, an opportunity to share our insights with chairs and governors, but also to hear from you about the influence that you can bring to bear in institutions in order that we can accelerate our actions in order to both mitigate and adapt to the problems of a changing climate. And I hope we will agree that those problems are real and intensifying, and that we in our institutions, and particularly through collective action, are able to bring intellect, energy, passion, as well as our resources to bear in order to do our part in that mitigation and adaptation role. So thank you again for joining us. Just quickly to run through the agenda, and then I'll introduce our expert witnesses, and then we will begin that process of exchanging information and debating the way forward. So we're going to begin with a short overview of the work of the Commission, which I will present. We will then invite chairs and governors who represent our expert panel to share their insights. And we will then go to 3 breakout sessions. Each session you will find yourself allocated to. Sonia will, through the magic of Zoom, put you into a room where there will be a facilitator and a question. There will be around about half an hour of that conversation. And then we will return as a group where we will hear from the facilitators, the proceeds of the discussions that have taken place. And then we will have a more general Q&A before wrapping up at about 11:30. So, I'd just like to introduce our 4 expert witnesses. Nicola, could I begin with you just as a very brief introduction to our group today?
Hello, Jim. I'm sitting next to a field in Gloucestershire, and a large tractor has just driven past the window. So hopefully I can do this in between. My name is Nicola de Jong. I am the chair of the University of Gloucestershire. Very keen supporter of this initiative, and I also sit on the committee of the CUC and the link person between the CUC and the EAUC. So if I can get all my acronyms right, then I can remember who I am on a good day. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Nicola. Evan, can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Evan Boulwood. On the agenda, you may notice my title is very long. But yeah, so Student Union, I'm the former Student Union Vice President of Society's Communication, representing the President's team on the Sustainability Board 1920 at the University of the West of England. So there was a lot of liaising between the Students' Union and the university, and also campaigning within the Students' Union and the university to bring out change, including climate action.
Thank you, Evan. Steve.
Good morning, I'm Steve Frampton. I was a college principal at Portsmouth College until 2 years ago, when I was elected to be the president of the Association of Colleges for 2 years. which I finished my duties on last month. I'm passionate about this agenda and have been since I was an activist in my teens for Greenpeace, and I'm looking forward to your contributions today.
Thank you, Steve. And Amy Smith from Stirling. Hi, welcome, Amy.
Hi, it's really nice to be here and see you all. So my name is Amy Smith. I'm the current Student Union President at Stirling University Student Union, and also before this was keen climate activist and still am. So really nice to hear from you all and looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah. We're also joined by members of the steering group who I'm sure will introduce themselves during the conversation as we proceed, but rather than going through all of our colleagues here, I think I would like, in the interest of time, to move us on so that we have time for that proper conversation. But I would like to thank our steering group colleagues who are with us, and thank also Sonia for all the work behind the scenes that has enabled us to come together today. So what is this Climate Commission? Well, I think it's fair to say it's a unique collaboration between the Association of Colleges, Guild HE, UUK and the EAUC, bringing together that partnership of FE and HE with a mission of understanding what the contribution of this combined sector might be. And it's worth noting that this is a huge sector. There is something of the order of 4.5 million students in the FE and HE sector. Somewhere in excess of 545,000 members of staff are employed across the sector. That's somewhere in the region of 7.7% of the UK population. That is a significant number. And we graduate from the university sector somewhere around 750,000 individuals each year. And we spend, as a combined sector, something in the region of 44 billion pounds. Those numbers were pre-COVID. They may, of course, change, but it gives a sense of the scale in which we as a combined sector could bring to bear for positive climate action. So that is probably the first point I would ask you to bear in mind. Were we able to act collectively, we have a very significant size and a huge financial resource. So working within that framework of the four bodies coming together, it's important to note that many of us in those organisations will be perhaps in the middle or towards the end of our careers. Yet our students are those who will live through the changing climate and the consequences of the actions that we and those before us have brought to bear. So it's very important that the Climate Commission actually has student climate commissioners who are advising and supporting us as commissioners and further members of the student body alongside other principals and vice chancellors who form the broader commission and the broader council advising on the commission. So we do have a large representative body, and a body that is trying to understand what it is that this combined sector can do. What is the action plan, if you like, that we can collectively identify? Our original intention was to bring that to COP26 in November of this year. You will be aware, of course, that COVID has led to the postponement of that event until November of 2021. We intend to continue our work and to bring the proceeds of this work to the COP in Glasgow next year. So we have convened a number of meetings to invite expert witnesses to share their views around 5 priorities that the Commission identified. Firstly, around mobilising our voice. Secondly, around the very important issue of research and innovation. Thirdly, about measurement and reporting and particularly the tricky issues of what is known in the trade as Scope 3 emissions, those in the supply chain, the purchased elements of the universities and colleges. Fourthly, around the issue of adaptation, particularly deeper adaptation, recognizing that there is change that is coming, and that even with the best will in the world, we may struggle to achieve the 1.5 degrees of change that represents our best future. And finally, and perhaps of equal importance, the role of the student experience and how that may be affected by a changing climate, but equally important, how the student body of today and tomorrow expects their institutions to be addressing the issues of climate change, and the way that institutions are responding is in part in direct response to that student demand. So we are at this point in time beginning to synthesize the findings that have come out of those 5 major events and beginning to pull those into what may form our action plan. But that isn't all that we have been doing. A very important element of our work has been engaging with the NAUS group to develop a roadmap for the FE sector. And that was launched earlier in the summer, and that has been extremely well received. And we would commend that to all of you who haven't yet seen it. It can be downloaded from the EAUC website, amongst other sites. We've presented the work of the Commission at the UN High-Level Political Forum, and we have also presented in a report to UNESCO views of on the future of education that the student commissioners have brought together. We are heading towards an event that Lord Deben will provide the keynote for us in November, which will be 1 year on from the inaugural meeting of the Climate Commission. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have done a considerable amount in the year that we have been working. There is much more to do, but we are in a position where we will be sharing the more considered views of the Commission as we distill down the set of findings. This set of findings will feed into those 5 priority discussions, conclusions. We have also had a special session that was asking the FE sector about issues of concern and opportunity for them, and that will also feed into our conclusions. And they will be presented in our November 1 year on meeting. So that provides a very brief overview of the work that we have been doing. You can, of course, view the recordings of all of those meetings on the EAUC website, where the documents associated with each meeting and synthesized summary reports are also available. So those of you who would like to do that, please download those for reading later. But looking at my clock, I'm just about on the time that I was asked to conclude my initial thoughts, because the important part of this meeting is to hear views from those who are either members of councils or chairs of council, or who have been involved with councils. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, for the next 15 minutes or so, is ask each of our invited expert witnesses to briefly summarize their perspective on the challenges as they see for the sector, but perhaps also for their own institution. The challenge in terms of addressing climate change, in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And if I take you in the order that I asked you to introduce yourselves, that means, Nicola, may I start with you?
You certainly may. Thank you, Jim. And first of all, just to say, I'm absolutely delighted that we are gathering together in this scale, because the scale of the challenges facing us is such that if we don't work together, across both HE and FE, we will simply be paddling around in our own little puddles while they're still there, and we won't actually be able to make much of a difference. And I think it is hugely important that we work together. So thank you to EAUC for bringing everybody together like this. Our role as educators, I believe, goes well beyond the usual requirements that businesses face in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And I think we have real challenges and opportunities in 3 areas. The first is with our students, about how we inform and educate them about the wider challenges of ecology, society, and the economy, and how those things interlink, and how we really imbue each of our curriculum areas with tools, with knowledge, with ideas, and with innovation about how our students can then go out and build on these in whatever role they move on to in the real world. So an example from us, our recent president of our student union did a degree in accounting, and actually she said she was surprised and delighted to find that that included a module on sustainability in accounting. And I think we need to look for examples where we are embedding it throughout all our curriculums. Secondly, I think we need to serve as a conscience and an inspiration for our local communities. We need to be bringing people together so that we can solve key local problems, and we can help people innovate by the combinations that we put together. And thirdly, and you mentioned this, Jim, the creation of knowledge. And here I'm not just talking about the hugely expensive research into things like hydrogen energy, which obviously require specific technologies and equipment, but actually also the intensely practical and the day-to-day working practices that we can all learn from, which will have an impact. So an example of that is research into sustainability of supply chain, which you mentioned in the scope 3. It is not just the fancy high-tech stuff. There is a huge amount that can be done. I think our current challenges are twofold. So one is about mainstreaming. I hear quite frequently, that's all very well, but students don't choose a university, and I assume a college, because it is sustainable. And increasingly, I think that our young people are challenging us in that view. And my plea would be to continue with that challenge, make it louder, make this a mainstream issue, vote with your feet. The other challenge for the governing body in particular is about keeping the faith and really holding firm for the longer term view. At the moment with COVID, there are enormous pressures on our budgets and on our staff, and the momentum pushes the executive to focus, as they should, on the short term so that we can get through the next month, the next 3 months, you know, the next however long it's going to be, eternity, I think. And the sector already has its challenges, as we know. And the dog disapproves of the tractor, I'm sorry about that. And I think our job as the governing body is to set the tone and to set the culture, and to really influence for what Jonathan Porritt in a recent lecture called hope in hell. So to take this opportunity that COVID gives us and this challenge, and to use it to drive our universities and our colleges to a systemic long-term view, where we are influencing not for a return to the old economy based on unsustainable consumption, but actually a greener and fairer future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Evan, can I come to you for a student perspective?
Cool. So I'm gonna, mostly gonna focus on the student side, because that is my my ball, as it were. I've got 3 points. 3 is a good magic number. So firstly, we need to and 3 enabling priorities, sorry. Firstly is to enable students to lead against climate change and to lead climate action. And what that looks like is firstly within higher education and further education institutions. So, for example, the school strikes, which were very, very impactful, of course. But equally, we need to enable people to lead amongst the organizations and the businesses that they will then become part of and lead, which leads me to my second point of enabling students to have the knowledge and skills to thrive in and build a carbon-free green society and economy. Universities and colleges have a responsibility to their students. So I'm just speaking a bit fast, apologies, I will slow down. So I'll say that again. We need to enable students to have the knowledge and the skills to thrive in and build a carbon-free green society and economy. So universities and colleges have a responsibility to their students to prepare them for the negative effects of climate change and also enable them to build and thrive in its solution, that is this carbon-free or neutral society. And in my view, this needs to go beyond tagging on sustainability. It needs to go beyond kind of just, in a way, having it as a thing that's there, rather than really in there. So when we do a course on business, we're doing a course on sustainable business. Or if we're doing whatever it is, if we're doing a course in anything at all, in architecture, really it's on sustainable architecture. It needs to be not just tagged on as, oh yeah, here's this subject. Oh, and you can also be sustainable with it if you want to be, but an essential criteria. And part of the criteria of even passing that course, whatever it may be. And finally, there's the big challenge of all students having impact and feeling investment in climate action and of course sustainability generally. Yeah, and it's the all here which is the kind of the hard part in a way. I like to think of it as kind of a triangle of engagement and investment. So at the top you've got the people who are heavily engaged, heavily invested, you know, are actively campaigning in their personal lives. They've taken lots of different steps against climate action, very keen, very passionate. And then down the bottom, and so you've got a few minority who are super, super dedicated. And then down the bottom, you've got more people and kind of less passionate, but hopefully still engaged slightly. And the challenge there isn't just to push people all the way to the top, because some people, you know, if you're going to do a degree in accounting, that's, yeah, if you're doing a degree in accounting, of course, you're probably going to be passionate about accounting. You might not be, but there we go. But we need everyone on this triangle to be invested somehow, and we need to put everyone onto it, so everyone has some kind of ownership and investment, some of which will be strong, some of which will be light, but everyone there should be thinking, oh, I have an impact on the climate, and equally I have a voice as well, that I can sign a petition, I can attend a protest, I can lobby my university, I can get involved with the Students' Union. So we need to kind of, yeah. So really what that looks like practically is having opportunities to be part of different climate action schemes. So schemes and opportunities and leading, protesting, inspiring, right down the bottom, which may be a very simple opportunity of having recycling bins in halls, and then all the way up to the top of opportunities to speak with the financial directors of your college, of your university, and say, hey, we as students think this, why are you doing such and such, and having a conversation about it. And that's a lot of work to enable these programs and enable these kind of slipstreams to go further up this triangle. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Steve, can we come to you, please?
Thank you, James, and I'll try not to repeat what Nicola and Evan said so eloquently, really. I'll start with, I think, the challenge, and the challenge is if you look on the news tonight, you will see Extinction Rebellion taking very significant action, not only in London, but also in the cities of the country. I think the challenge for us is, how do we make ourselves very relevant, and how do we make ourselves very action orientated against that backdrop? Because if we can't engage our students through the mechanisms that we have, they're going to take action in that way. And that might not be as constructive as we would want. So I think that's one of the challenges. I think the opportunities are, we've got engaged governors here, and governors, I think, will be critical to driving the strategy, and as Nicola said, developing that culture. When we nearly always have to be engaged in a post-COVID world, hopefully, in the finances and the enrolment processes that we're in at the moment. And I think we do have that duty to make sure that we focus on that medium and long term. Couldn't agree more with Evan. I think there's a massive opportunity for students to not only get involved on this agenda, but really lead it and take ownership of it. And I think the second point I would make really is, what an opportunity for us to show civic leadership on behalf of our communities, really, those communities that we serve locally and to a certain extent nationally as well. And I think there are a number of tools where we could use the audit tools that are in the FE roadmap, for instance, use those in combination perhaps with FE and HE students working together on behalf of their communities to at least know where we start. I think the other thing I would say is the importance of actually having a direction of travel, a roadmap. FE's actually been a long way behind the HE sector for various reasons. We haven't had the accountability, and we certainly haven't had the financial investment for 9 years to enable us to do what we've wanted. But we've also lacked a coherent structure, a roadmap, I think, to help the FE colleges take the actions they really do want to take. And I think that work with NOUS has proved invaluable. Certainly, we've got between 60 and 100 colleges already using that document, identifying where they are on their journeys, and governors particularly leading on marking out the strategic direction of travel they want their institutions to take. I think we must be action orientated, and I think this is imperative, really. If not, other organisations are going to take the lead for us, really. Particularly, I think, and I think as Nicola quite rightly identified, the one where we can do most on this, I think, is in the curriculum. I mean, we do influence, as James has said, you know, nearly 5 million students per annum. We can't allow this to be a bolt-on additionality. It's got to be mainstream and core. I think we need a thorough and radical review of the curriculum, right the way through, working with our primary and secondary phases, and we can work with them on that to have a values-led curriculum that's relevant to their needs going forward. Not a curriculum really that reflects, you know, the 20th century needs. It's their future, and we need to ensure that they're properly prepared by having a meaningful curriculum that they co-construct with us, not that we impose on them. So I couldn't agree with Evan more, really. This is where I think we need to work not only with, but with students showing some leadership on this perspective. And how exciting would that be? We'd all be much more relevant institutions if the curriculum was co-constructed rather than imposed. As a chief examiner for A-level geography, I know the constraints, and I know that we all work with professional bodies on shaping that, but we ought to be taking the moral high ground here and the lead and making sure that we influence that for the positive, really. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. For the first time, we've got FE and HE working together collaboratively on this agenda. And I think if governors take the strategic lead and establish that culture for the medium and long term, we can achieve some of those things that James said at the beginning. So thanks ever so much for coming today and getting involved.
Thank you, Steve. And Amy, over to you.
Hi, yeah, thank you everyone. It's been really great to hear from you all so far. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the more structural and systemic kind of challenges that I am seeing at the moment with climate change. So firstly, obviously, as several other people have mentioned, COVID and climate change. And I think that it's a huge challenge to understand and communicate the links between COVID and climate change. These are both inherently linked in terms of the science, you know, air quality making COVID symptoms worse. And with COVID and climate change, if you don't deal with one, the other one gets worse. So they are intrinsically linked. And I think, you know, it's one thing for us to be able to understand that as governors and as people on our university courts, but another to be able to communicate that. to our student body and our staff body. And often we're so hesitant to communicate things which aren't necessarily good news stories, and our reporting structures internally can they lend themselves to reporting back on things that we have done or already achieved. But this really doesn't fit into that structure when we're thinking about climate action. But this is something to consider during such a big time of change, how we communicate this kind of work that we're doing. And I think that building back better narratives can be quite helpful in doing that and present quite a good opportunity. But changing the narrative and your whole institutional culture is a huge challenge that we're all facing. And we do have a small window of time now to kind of harness that opportunity, and something that I think we need to be making the most of. Secondly, as some of the other speakers have also referenced, about embedding what we know into what we do. We're so lucky to have a generation of climate strikers coming to our universities. You know, we kind of often say that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, but when it comes to climate, they're the leaders of today. They're doing that now. And we're lucky to have those students in our student body coming to our universities. Some of them are in our student unions, our student union presidents, or people on court. So how we harness that power and that passion in order to improve our institutions as a whole, I think is hugely, hugely important. And using the people who do have that knowledge and that passion already, like as Evan had said, that kind of minority of people who are already really engaged, and how we can kind of use that to bring other people along with us and work collaboratively with, like, kind of using the FE roadmap as well, as Steve had said. But this is a huge challenge because universities are quite often slow-moving vehicles, you know, subject to multi-levels of governance and a lot of rules and regulations. It's a big challenge to be able to embed new practices consistently across a huge organisation. And if structures don't allow you to change quickly, that's a huge, huge challenge that we're facing, and one that can be addressed partly through COVID, but is still a huge challenge for us. The third one is something that we haven't talked too much about yet today, which is dealing with systemic inequalities and giving everyone a seat at the table. So we're trying to change the whole world here with solving climate change. And if we do that without including everyone, it just won't work. Our approach will be piecemeal and we'll miss important opportunities. So systemic inequalities is something that, no matter how new your university is something that we're all dealing with and has become so apparent during the summer months. So I think we really need to make sure we are including that within our climate action work. And you know, some of that can be done through our co-creation of the curriculum and these other elements of kind of working really collaboratively and, like I said, giving everyone a seat at the table in climate action. And then lastly, again, a point that's already been mentioned, but I couldn't talk to university governors without talking about financial challenges. So of course, I have to mention this. You know, our finances are a challenge at the best of times, least of all now. And this is one thing that we do need to take a slightly longer term view on, as Nicola had said at the beginning, and think kind of beyond this financial year, beyond the next few months, to look at how investing in energy efficient systems, electric vehicles, thinking about our international travel and those kind of scope 3 emissions. We really need a multifaceted approach here and to think kind of a little bit bigger on some of these aspects. So yeah, I feel like I've been a little bit more negative than some of the other speakers, but I do just want to finish off by saying that these are some big challenges, but we have all the tools to rise to them already, and we really have to do it now because we don't have much time. But thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for that reality check, not negative, but that's the reality in which we find ourselves. So my thanks to our 4 expert witnesses providing that perspective, which will help, I hope, as we move into the breakout sessions. The chat has just sent round a message about how the breakout sessions will function. There is a question for each of the 3 breakout rooms, and we have a facilitator. Amy, Evan and Nicola will be facilitating the 3 breakout rooms. And with a bit of luck now, Sonia will enact the process by which we magically arrive in a breakout room.
Thanks, Jim. And we have until 11, so a bit more than 20 minutes, and then we'll reconvene and discuss our discussions. All right, so let's move into our rooms.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a stimulating set of discussions. Certainly that was the case in breakout room 2, where I I found myself. What we're going to do now is ask the facilitator for each of the rooms just to provide us with a short summary of the key issues and conclusions that each breakout room has reached. I appreciate that our facilitators haven't had a lot of time to pull this together, but I'm sure they'll do an excellent job. The breakout room 1, Amy was the facilitator. Amy, over to you for a short overview of the findings.
Thank you. Yeah, so in our breakout room, we talked about how the Board of Governors has engaged with sustainability issues. And we had quite a range of different kind of universities and institutions involved. So it was quite interesting to hear different perspectives. And we talked about the role of governors in finding the right questions to ask and kind of finding those leading points to lead on within the institution, things around framework, what audit committees can do, kind of beyond finance to ask key questions and kind of make sure there's a whole institutional approach. So we talked about how the leadership scorecards can be quite useful in that. Ian, maybe you could share the links that you shared with us like in the main chat as well, if they're not there already, then that would be good. And what else did we talk about financial resilience and kind of going beyond finance when we're talking about sustainability, looking at sustainability as a whole, and kind of that whole point about resilience. We talked about embedding, how you can embed sustainability within your governance structures as a governing board, and having like key members on committees, so including student input in that. Having someone who is directly responsible for sustainability is something that people had found quite helpful where it had been implemented, but isn't something that was kind of that we had all had experience of. So that's a point that we'll kind of be taking forward. And yeah, about the kind of financial pressures and limitations on our abilities to invest in new technologies, but how we can kind of use our kind of weight to put pressure on supply chains and kind of use that influence that we do have at our disposal in order to make some positive changes kind of more broadly. So I hope that covered everything that we had talked about, but if there are other points, then I'm sure people can share.
Amy, thanks for such a comprehensive overview. We'll come to main questions afterwards. So we're just going to take out our 3 rooms first, and then we'll open up for wider debate. So Evan, you were in room 2 in the facilitator role.
Mm-hmm. So our question was, how does your Board of Governors engage with students on sustainability issues? We started off thinking that it doesn't engage enough with students, although everyone said that they engage with the Students' Union and their officers, and they have student representatives on their board and on kind of subcommittees as well, which, yeah, and different ways that student representatives are woven into, for example, finance committees and estates, and the importance of that, especially when it comes to kind of on topic issues like the divestment debate. But then we kind of got to the point of where we're not engaged enough. So what are our actions then? We know this is true, what should we do? So in terms of actions, engaging the student boards on the reps, making sure making sure that you are engaging with them personally, having a good relationship with the Students' Union, sorry, and then the different issues around being like, if you're a car-based university that has very bad public transport links, perhaps one way of engaging with students is to engage with local authorities and trying to build that up there. And there was a question of how, to what extent should governors be directly engaged with students, because of course, the limited time they have. But there are other really good actions that kind of answer that question. If I just get it there. So saying that the governor's role is to ensure that the messaging is cascading downwards, working on curriculum, But we see that sustainability and climate action is a #1 issue for students. We also had a question on how to challenge VCs and how to kind of challenge each other when it comes to sustainability. One point raised is that we need to make sure that these kind of questions about climate action aren't just happening in the subcommittees, but are happening in Board of Governors, are happening at the highest level they can, not just kind of relegated below, because it's a very important issue for students. And ensuring that it's on the agenda. A point was then raised that there's lots of different things that are taking up kind of governors and leaders' time. So in terms of priorities, so a really good action then was putting the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a strategic underpinning under the annual report, because the UN Sustainability Development Goals really do speak to basically any kind of issue that is on students' minds. So the Black Lives Matter protests, probably the word, would be on there, probably on the equalities thing. Obviously climate action is on there as well. Stuff to do with health and mental health is on those sustainability development goals as well. And so putting that as a strategic underpinning really covers all bases and really allows you to check against it. And Jim mentions it and allows you to see the interconnectedness of it all. I know Amy was saying earlier the links between COVID and climate action, and also the links between equality and climate action as well, and the disproportionate effect that climate change will have. Finally, 2 final points. F and GP should also consider this, have carbon accounting, make sure that it's on the cards when it comes to finance. And finally, a really good one between communication between students and governors. Students need to hear something back from governors. So when students give really useful insight through whatever channel to governors, it's really valuable for the students to get something back, even if it's really something simple like an email that says, wow, this is really good, we're discussing it. And I found this as well. Sometimes you can even have a meeting with someone and you don't hear anything for months, and then suddenly you've realized they've done all these different things. You're like, well, wait a second, I didn't even realize my contribution was that valuable, but now it seems to be, yeah. So the communication back down from governors is an important thing as well. Hopefully you followed some of that.
Okay, thank you, Evan. And finally, Nicola in breakout room 3.
So our question was, what do you need to increase climate action within your institution at board level? So very specifically at the board. And we had a wide range of areas that we thought could be helpful. So one was actually the commitment from your board members, and maybe a way of helping to establish this culture and commitment at the board level is provision of some training that governors can go through to really understand what the issues are. We thought as well, really being the voice for sustainability, both in terms of teaching and in terms of research, collaborative research, looking at the technologies of the future, and also collaboration between, at the local level, higher education and further education institutions, so that we have a really strong local voice on this issue as the educators of the 16+ world. Having a champion on the board who is a sustainability champion, we've already talked about, and also having a standing agenda item, which means that every time we meet, one of the questions is, what are we doing about the climate emergency? What are we doing against our sustainability targets? We talked a bit about the political side of it, so the opportunity to influence government with the post-16 white paper coming out in the autumn, the opportunity of working closely with the OFS, and also the codes of governance for both further and higher education, certainly in England, looking at whether this is something which is covered in those codes of governance, and I believe it is at the CUC level. I'm not so familiar with the AOC. We talked as well about, and thank you very much, Fiona, for sharing a very useful link, which I will look at later, but making sure that we're making the business case for sustainability. So it is not just, it's the right thing to do, it's not just a moral imperative, there is actually a solid, what are the benefits for the university? And this led us on to a small discussion about competitiveness between institutions, and actually using sustainability as a means of attracting students and a means of building reputation can be a very, very strong force for good, can also perhaps get in the way of some of the collaboration goals that we feel are really necessary. I think that was everything, unless I've forgotten anything from anybody. Thank you. It's a very useful session for me. Thank you. I've got a list.
And one of the things that was in the discussion in Breakout Room 2 was the actions that governors will take back to the ranch, so to speak, things that, by virtue of the conversations we're having, things that might be now a regular occurrence on the agenda. Steve in Breakout Room 2 asked a very helpful question that prompted a series of actions. Steve, do you want to summarize what you heard from those actions?
Yeah, thank you, James, and thank you to the groups and for the feedback. I think that was very, very helpful and very encouraging. I think the thing that I asked really was, so as a result of today, what's going to happen? What's going to be different? And what were the actions that you will personally take away to work with on your boards? I think the range of issues that have come up, if we were to collectively all work on those with our boards, we would achieve a tremendous amount. I mean, I think they covered about the work that we would do around business cases, the communication, particularly two-way with students. But I'd also say I think it would be great if this was a co-constructed agenda as opposed to an imposed agenda. I don't think it's just communication with students. If anything, I think it's the other way around. And I think Amy and Evan were intimating that. So my personal challenge to everybody would be, what are the 3 things that you're going to do differently? What are you going to commit to taking away and doing with your board and trying to influence your board on, critically working with your students in a co-constructive way? Because they, as Amy so passionately said at the beginning, and Jim reminded us all, many of us are not going to be perhaps as impacted as they certainly will in their professional, personal, and lives, and collectively. So I think it's absolutely imperative that whatever we do isn't done to students, that we're working alongside them, and if anything, it's their leadership leading on the co-construction part. So my challenge is, what are we going to do? What are we doing as individuals? Thank you, James.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to open up now for any observations or responses to Steve's challenge. I'm going to ask if Sonia and Fiona can help identify people who might be on screen too. I'm trying to get everybody on screen, but it's not always letting me. So I'm just looking to see who might want to respond to Steve's challenge. I'm looking for hand signals. Come on, someone needs to be brave. Nicola, are you signaling? Thank you.
I'm signaling bravery and also the desire to nick something for free, which is, Steve, I'm really interested in. I think the point about training was such an important start point, and actually an awful lot of the stuff we're talking about, if you have a bunch of people who sit around your governing body table whose actual knowledge is no more than a vague awareness that it's quite a topical issue and quite important, and the world might end one day. I think it's really, really important that we start with that. I'm just about to go into a meeting with somebody on from Advanced HE on a totally different topic, but I've scribbled that down to add to the agenda, and would be very interested in what the AOC are doing, as I believe the topics could be very closely related. So maybe we could pick up on that one separately.
Yeah, be very happy to, and I think it's something that we would do with the EAUC, and Sonia and I are actually having a call on this tomorrow morning.
Oh, fabulous.
Or Thursday. Yeah, and there's no reason the training shouldn't be joint, Nicola. I entirely agree, and I'm sure we could, as a commission, commit to doing that, and we'd be very, very happy to do it. I'm sure Jim would want to be involved, and some of the other commissioners as well.
I think this is an opportunity within our action plan for the combined sector. The training has to be an absolutely critical component. We need everybody to get up to the level in which they feel competent and capable to have those sorts of difficult discussions, because you're setting the cultural positioning of the institution in which you're a governor or the chair of the board. And you have to feel confident that you can have that conversation with, as we were hearing in breakout room 2, about vice chancellors that are in their job description, they have to be glass half full and probably glass properly full. So there's a conversation there. Amy, were you signaling to come in? Amy Smith?
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. Obviously this point about training is really important, and just kind of building that awareness within the Board of Governors, but it's something that we've already talked a little bit about, students already having that knowledge, and it might be a good opportunity to bring students in to present to your Board of Governors about what they know about climate issues, and kind of use that as your starting point for the conversation, because yeah, that would be kind of a good way to bring them in without having to pay for expensive training also.
Great idea.
Stephen Lightly.
I hope you can all hear me. I had some problems before. I think I'm going to take about one point, which was really initiated by something that Amy was talking about before, which is the interrelationship between climate change and COVID. And I think my own institution at Newcastle has made great efforts to minimise use of business travel during this period. And I'd be interested to find out what impact that's had on the impact on climate change in this period, and also how it's going to be replicated and retained going forward, because I think that could probably make quite a difference to the reduction in CO2 emissions that this institution is trying to achieve. So I'm going to try and look into that.
Okay. Anyone else like to share a thought on an action to take away from today? Looking for any signals.
Jim, I'll just say something. We're committed to doing CUC some guidance on data sets to help governors get the right information to think about how they govern, and the sorts of use of performance indicators and all of that. And I think what this has done for me is give me a prompt to, within that framework of a piece of work, to have an explicit thing about the sorts of data sets that boards can look at to monitor progress and so on. And I will probably come and have a chat with you about it, because I know UWE continues to do a lot of work on that sort of front. So that would be a useful thing. And then to spread that practice.
Thank you, John. And I'm sure the 4 parties that are involved in the commission would welcome that and offer their support to help you develop that set of performance indicators. Stuart?
I am now unmuted. Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion, that performance indicators are really quite useful for actually motivating my financial colleagues that are with me on boards in St Andrews University, and I think that's useful too. Also, making use of our internal and our external auditors. They've got a great perspective on what's going on across the sector, and the best way of getting good ideas for St Andrews is to pinch them from other universities. And the internal and external auditors are really quite good at briefing us on what's happening across the sector as well. But I come back to the fundamental point which we started off with, which is getting the the court to actually have that commitment in a broad sense, and that involves the university strategy. And I think if you haven't got anything in your university strategy associated with social responsibility and its impact on climate change and everything else, then I think that's a big gap, and I think needs to be remedied right away.
Thank you, Stuart. Angus.
Hi, it's really just one thing just to take away. I mean, I mentioned it in the subgroup and Nicola picked up on it in the reporting back, but I think it's really important that one really important takeaway is if each person can go back to their governing body and ensure that climate emergency is a standing item on every agenda meeting, on the agenda for every meeting, and use the words climate emergency, not climate change or sustainability. Actually use the words climate emergency. And it should be reported on at every meeting on the progress and things that the university or college has done from one meeting to the next. I think that's one of the, just having it on the agenda is going to be a very powerful way of affecting, of keeping it alive and keeping work progressing.
Thank you, Angus, for reminding us about the declarations of climate and often ecological added into the climate and ecological emergency declarations. And that would probably be something for boards to have as a discussion point that would then enable the standing item of climate emergency progress to have a reference point for actions. And that's something that the Board of Governors in UWE led the discussion about the declaration, which we made at the beginning of the tail end of last year. I'm scanning for other comments. Emma from Winchester.
I quite agree climate emergency is very important and Winchester declared one. However, I would just make the point that climate action is only one of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, and the others are equally important.
And one of the things to note when one thinks about the SDGs is to recognize those interrelationships between the 17 goals, and that action on one may have a negative impact on one or more of the other goals. And the important thing is trying to balance out and reconcile why and how you choose those actions. But the others become almost incidental if the climate is adverse, which sadly it will be without further actions. Looking again to see if anyone has some final comments. I'm very conscious it's about 24 minutes past. We've got a few more minutes for anyone, and then I'll just do the usual summary at the end. Stephen? Sorry, we're losing your voice, Stephen.
Benefited Newcastle. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're in now.
And that is that we have joined with other partners in Newcastle to have a climate emergency across the city as a whole. And that includes other universities and I think higher education colleges as well as FEs, and also the local council and other large employers. So I'd recommend that because that does really get things moving as well.
Now, our student commissioners have questions. Amy and Marta, do you want just to air some observations at this point?
Yeah, so I was thinking around, Stephen, you just said it, and Stuart, you said it earlier about pinching ideas from other universities or like sharing it across the city. But obviously some kind of changes, they need like government action or legislation and stuff. But do you feel like you have, as governors or part of governing bodies, do you feel like you have the power to try and influence some of these changes, like lobbying the government to influence legislation?
The lobbying role of governors. John, what does CUC have to say about lobbying?
If anybody can work out a way to make this government do sensible things, I think we'd welcome that and be happy to work with them. Of course, we do it, but we do it in conversation, either with ministers and officials. I've got to say, in all the time I've talked to them, I've never heard one of them ask any question at all. And I'm including the OFS about in this, questions about what we were doing about climate change or anything of that sort, even when it's always us that puts it on the table. And we always get a polite reception, but very little happens, I'm afraid. And that's true on a number of things, not just this. Sorry to be gloomy, but that's the reality that I see.
Marta.
Well, I have a small question, but I mean, we already kind of touched upon this, but to me, I really saw our institutions are coping with the COVID-19 crisis. And indeed, this seems is both an opportunity, but it's also a stop for many institutions the work toward the climate crisis. So I was wondering whether you reckon that the COVID-19 will be still a strong impact to actually implement some changes within your institution toward climate crisis for next year. I mean, this year is still unknown, but do you think like this is going to be still an impact for your institution, or we can, as a student, we can still think and believe the university can do something in a short term?
Thank you, Marta. Does anyone like to pick up and respond to the uncertainty of COVID, but the absolute requirement still to act on climate? How are we going to balance that, and how can the culture be set by the board that enables that to happen? Nicola, I think I saw your hand come up.
Yeah, Marta, I think that's a fabulous question, and it's really one that works, I think, in two ways. On the one hand, as somebody who's got a professional background in change management, if somebody had said to me a year ago, right, I want you to get the entire university up and running virtually, every single member of staff, all lectures online, all assessments online, and also produce a plan for how we might come back safely. And very little budget, and you've got 3 weeks to do it, I would have laughed at them. However, from what it does show me is that if there is an imperative, we can work miracles. We really can make things happen. And if we can try and hold on to that same imperative, I mean, the difference obviously is between an immediately burning platform and a slightly longer term emergency. But if we can harness that willingness to change and that willingness to adapt, and after all, willingness to adapt is what guarantees our survival in the long run, then we can do this. And the other thing is really learning the lessons from COVID. You know, people have already talked about reducing transport, making much more use of these sorts of technologies, learning to engage with each other in a different way. I think in 10 years' time, and in my optimistic moments, I think 10 years' time, we will be sort of talking as COVID as, wow, do you remember that weird thing that happened? I mean, we'll be so immersed in all the other emergencies that go on that we might even not have time to think about it. But, you know, this for me, it's about taking what we can from the current crisis and trying to apply them to the next big crisis, which is looming and which will have a far more deadly and far more substantial impact.
Thank you, Nicola. And I think that very eloquently brings us to the end of this session. Can I thank all our participants for their contributions, and particularly thank our expert witnesses who have helped shape and frame the discussions that we've had. I hope our chairs and our governors have found this useful, and that there are some insights that you will be able to take back to your institution and to undertake those actions that Steve has challenged you with, the opportunity to mainstream, if you like, debate and discussion at board level about the climate emergency, about the actions that can be taken both within the institution which you serve, but also to explore those collaborative opportunities. how across city spaces, how across counties, institutions might be able to work together, and how the change that we have seen in the last 6 to 8 months, how those benefits of the rapid change that Nicola has reminded us of, how that can carry forward in ways that engender a climate-friendly set of actions from universities. So with all of those issues, we will take the proceeds of today, we will summarize and bring out the distilled wisdom. The recording will go online pretty quickly, probably by tomorrow. I would think it will be online, if not later today. Chance to refresh your knowledge about what was said, and please continue the conversation with the parties to this, with UK, with Guild HE, with AOC, and with the EAUC. We're working well together, but there's always room for more at the table. So do share your insights, your successes as you go back to have those debates, the challenges that you face, as several of you have pointed out, and I think it was Stuart who particularly alerted us to this, that it may already be a challenge in another institution where we have actually got a solution. And if we are sharing and collaborative and co-producing our future, then we do have the opportunity to stop repeating the mistakes of the past and to share those successes and move collectively. Because our students who will have, if they graduate this year, there's another 60 years of life according to actuary tables. That's 2080. A lot of the committed to climate change that we already know is coming will affect them over that life course. Well, let's try and minimize some of those impacts through the actions that we can collectively take. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time today. I do hope you found this useful. I know that we in the Commission do. I can tell by the way in which people have been nodding. So thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye, folks.
Bye.